Hello, everybody. This Shabbat is Shabbat Zachor. The parasha is Tetzaveh. You shall command the people of Israel to continue with the building of the Mishkan, of the tent of meeting. And this parasha focuses on the clothing of the high priest and the high priest's task in the tent of meeting. And essentially, what the high priest is the Holy of Holies in the ranking of the servants of the Mishkan. Just like we have the Holy and the Holy of Holies in the architecture of the building or the structure, the human aspect mirrors that. So we learn that there's designation. Everybody has a designation. So being chosen means that you are chosen for a certain task. The way I like to compare it to is a teacher in the classroom, that there are 40 human beings in that classroom, or less if you're lucky. But then one person in that classroom is designated, was chosen to teach, to do something else. If we look at the world as such, maybe we'll have less anti-Semitism. But the idea of the high priest, as opposed to a lay priest, is to show that even within Judaism, we have gradations, we have hierarchy. Now, the hierarchy doesn't mean that one is worth more than the other in the eyes of God and justice. It doesn't, and that's what we bring as Jews. This new concept of, again, we the people. But what it does mean that there's hierarchy professionally, and the high priest is the one person that is designated to do a certain task, and we'll look at it in right now, and wear certain clothes that distinguishes him from other lay priests. And it once the high priest wears his clothing, it's always the question, is he now himself still? Or does he now is he his function as a high priest? And the clothes make who he is. So, of course, we'll discuss this and both sides of it. But Shabbat Zachor, also we call it Zachor, to remember, um, comes from Deuteronomy, when we have to remember what Amalek, the Amalekites, did to us when we came out of Egypt and we were weak, and they attacked the stragglers from behind. So very cowardly, but very damaging, because they went to the kind of the soft spot that we have. So we have to remember that. Imagine when you're a kid, when you're a child, and somebody hurts you when you're a child, it's much more, the effect is much worse than if somebody hurts you when you're adult and you're already formed. So can you imagine that the Amalekites were they hurt children. So you have to eliminate that. So why do we read it this Shabbat? Because we're in Exodus still. Why should we read a paragraph from the Haftarah, the additional or the Maftir? Sorry, we read from Deuteronomy, and the reason is that because this is the Shabbat before Purim, and the Shabbat before Purim, we always read this section. And why then do we read this section before Purim? The reason we read it before Purim is because the one of the main protagonists of the scroll of Esther, the book of Esther, the story of the in ancient Persia that wanted to annihilate the Jewish people altogether. The final solution 2,500 years ago, 20 about 2,700 years ago, um, is the person in the Persian government under Ahasuerus was Haman, and he was his right hand and advisor, and he convinced the king to annihilate the Jewish people. And the reason that he used was because they are different. They don't obey the king's commandments. They do what they have their own commandment that they obey. Of course, the commandment to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. And of course, this is the same idea that the those who opposed Daniel in the book of Daniel, they said, look, he doesn't do, him and his cohort are doing fulfilling their own commandment. They're not bowing down to this big idol that we put in the center of the square. So, and then, of course, the king, as much as he liked Daniel and his cohort, had to throw them into the fiery furnace. They came out unscathed, but nonetheless, they had to go through this. This is about the same time. The book of Esther and the book of Daniel happen around the same time in the under the Persian Empire. So they use the same excuse of hating and trying to eliminate the Jews is because they have their own decree. They have a different loyalty. They have loyalty not to the country, but to something universal. So that always scared people, and all the blood libels in Jewish history always had the same kind of kernel of idea that is similar, that the Jews have a dual loyalty, or sometimes not even dual, but just loyalty to somewhere else or somewhere that they call higher. And of course, once you say to a king of an empire of 127 countries that they're worshiping somebody or something higher than him, you get in trouble. So, so what's the connection also between the parsha that we read about the high priest and his clothing and Purim? So, in one word, clothing. So we know that on Purim, the custom is to dress up as somebody else. It is the same idea, but it's not. It's not. Doesn't come from the same idea, but it kind of looks like the Jewish Halloween or Carnival, which is the same kind of idea. Carnival and Halloween. It's before. It's the last spirits, the different spirits. The carnival is, of course, before Ash Wednesday and the dressing up before before Lent coming down and being more thoughtful. But Purim is the idea of dressing up comes from being somebody else. So we don't distinguish between, we're so happy, we're so elated that the commandment is to be almost inebriated to the point where we can't distinguish between Haman, who is the bad person, and Mordecai, who is the good person in this. So, in a sense, being above the good and evil. Before we ate from the garden, from the tree, from the fruit of the tree of good of knowledge, which is the tree of knowledge, good and bad. So when you are a child, you live in an environment that if nobody introduced you with bad, you may think that the whole world is good. And that's why we don't have the choice. We're not liable for our choices before we're adults, before 13 years old, because we live in a different mindset of everything good. And that's great. And I wish people continued with that, of course. But since we do have the serpent in this world that succeeded in his mission to trip us and to confuse us with the tree of good and evil, we now have to discern our whole life when we're adults what is good and what is bad. And a lot of our energy goes there. So, um, what is the connection again between Purim and the high priest in our parasha? The dress. What is the connection to the Garden of Eden between good and evil? Dress. And I want to spend some time here to, before we get to the specific clothing of the high priest, the specific clothing on Purim, and the specific clothing of Adam and Eve. The word clothing in Hebrew, and that was the first time we hear about the word clothing, is when Adam and Eve, after their sin, are ashamed. They start doubting themselves. And the problem with that was that God said to them, "Who told you that you're naked? Why are you embarrassed?" So the point that the serpent wanted to hurt us through was not just to trip us to eat from the tree of knowledge that God said, "Don't eat from it. And the day you would eat from it, you will die." First of all, we don't know in what way we would have died, physically, spiritually. Maybe that part of our lives would die and then something happened, just like in any big event in our lives that we always say there was the life, my life before and my life after. So something dies in us, but then there's a renewal and there's a new life that we have to adjust to. So it doesn't mean total end. So what the serpent did, and the biggest damage that the serpent caused humanity, is to start doubting its own self. I always say, and I bet every biblical knowledge I have about this, that if Adam and Eve would have said immediately, "We're sorry, God, we made a mistake. Well, I know you, we know you told us not to eat from the tree of knowledge, but we did. We tripped. We're sorry." If they would have sincerely come back, God would have forgiven them, because we have to have the element of tshuva, of repentance. God, there's a midrash that says that God created the world after he created the element of repentance. Shabbat, tshuva, same idea. Because he knew that anything that he creates and is outside of himself can't be perfect and can't be everlasting. So there would be always the risk of faltering, and so you have to have a mechanism of returning, because otherwise God created this whole world and just let it come down just because of one mistake. So that doesn't make sense on any level. So, but the reason they had to be expelled from the Garden of Eden and be now in extracted from the garden and from the tree of life, their proximity to the tree of life, their access to the tree of life and the regeneration was because they didn't do tshuva. They didn't repent and they hid. And it says, and this is where everything comes together in this one word. They put on themselves beged, begadim. The word beged, clothing in Hebrew, because they were ashamed and they put something on top of themselves to be something else. And human beings are the only animal in this world that wears clothing, unless you're a dog in Manhattan. But then, what does that mean, the clothing? The clothing means that you are hiding. And the word beged in Hebrew is the same word as betrayal, begida. So you are hiding behind something. So there's an expression, of course, the clothing makes the man, but it really is not it this shouldn't be the ultimate goal that we strive to. And actually, the word, the concept that is perfection from a human being perspective is when a person gets to this state in his life or her life where the inside and outside are the same. Tocho kevaro. Whatever you feel inside is what you say. Again, doesn't mean if you think bad things about people, you have to let them know. But that in general, people know who you are, that you're not hiding something that would shock people to the core, that would confuse them. So that's really the idea. Um, so the whole concept of clothing is really in the basis of the high priesthood, the Purim, and the Garden of Eden. Now let's try to bring this all together. In the story of Purim, what is Haman trying to do? He's trying to cause the Jewish people to bow down first. That's what he was trying to ask Mordechai, who was a minister also in or very important person in the courtyard of the king. He might have been a judge. It says that he sat in the city's gate, and that normally suggests that he was maybe a judge, but definitely someone with high position. And Haman, that Ahasuerus raised, it says he promoted him over and over until he really became his personal advisor. Um, sees Mordechai, and Mordechai, as opposed to everybody else in the court of the king, does not want to bow down to Haman, because we don't bow down to people, we don't bow down to idols, we only bow down to God. So he was very upset about that, and he, of course, blamed that the Jewish people and Mordechai as their representative as wearing clothing, as betraying the king, because actually they have a different loyalty that is behind what they are presenting. And that's really the idea. Now, leave that alone for a minute. The high priest, we go back to the question, is he himself, or is he taking the role of his clothing? And that's essential in probably every aspect of our lives. So one, of course, says that yes, once he slides into his clothing, he is now the high priest and he loses himself. So Aaron lost his own self. He is now a high priest. Okay, and I can relate to that approach, and we'll look at it. Um, One way to see that a proof in a sense to that approach was when the tent of meeting was finally inaugurated, and on that day of the inauguration, his two sons died on the spot. Why? Because the Torah tells us they brought a foreign fire. But Moses tells Aaron not to make a scene almost. And Aaron, even before Moses says that to him, he is silent. It's almost like he's removed from his children, his own two sons that he saw burning on the fire, on the altar, in front of his eyes on the inauguration day of the Mishkan. So we see an evidence that he's removed from his personal self, and he is now in the position of the high priest that has to preside over the correct the correct service in the sanctuary. So that's of course one side. But then Moses tells him, "Don't make a scene. Don't be utterly upset, because God used your children to show that he is taking the people who are the closest to him." Okay, it sounds almost counterintuitive, that why would you hurt or take away from life the people who are the closest to you? But what he was saying is they wouldn't have burned had they not been very close to me, meaning close to the fire. They brought a foreign fire. They played with fire. That's really what it suggests. But it means that they were very close to the fire. So don't be upset or utterly upset, because there's a silver lining here that means that they are now an example for generations to come, that they're not martyrs, but they are an example of how God treats the people who are as close to him, and also that the people who are the closest also have to understand that they have to be very respectful, not to take God casually in any way. When Moses meets God in the burning bush, the first thing he tells him, take your shoes off, because this is a holy place. So you have to be respectful, even though you feel that this is your position and this is who you're close to God. So that, in a sense, is also kind of proof of you have to empty yourself from who you are, because now you're in a position, and don't think that you're just as a human being close to God. You have an office to fulfill, and you have to be very respectful of the office. So the clothing, in a sense, make Aaron a new person. That's one side of it. The second side of it is that Aaron still is his own person, because they tailor the clothing for Aaron in his size. So it still means that there's something that still stays with Aaron personally in this. But either way, it's an example of how the clothing cover who you are, and they make you somebody else. Okay, so that's a very important example. And of course, maybe this is a positive example, or tikkun, as we say. It's a correction for the clothing in the Garden of Eden that were made to cover the shame of Adam and Eve. So it's a very negative context in the Garden of Eden. Here, you may say it's a positive um, connotation and aspect of the clothing, that we become actually God fearing instead of God escaping from God. Um, there's a really nice story that I tell on the high holidays sometime. There's a story of this man who was a businessman, and he he traveled a lot in the world, and he was Orthodox, Hasidic, but he could never wear his clothing all year round because he's on business trips and he wanted to be more professional in the business. So, but on the high holidays, on Yom Kippur, he would come and he would dress as a chassid and sit in front of his rabbi, the rebbe, and pray all day. And then one year, he felt like he was actually being, in a sense, betraying himself and other people, because 340, 364 days a year, he didn't dress like this. So he decided to come dressed as he normally dresses, with a suit and tie, but not as a chassid. Um, and he came to Yom Kippur service and sat in front of his rabbi. And at the end of the service, he came to the rabbi and he said, you probably ask yourself why I'm dressed like this. And, every year I dress like a chassid, but I felt that I am, I'm not being honest to myself. And I wanted to tell you that, you know, I 364 days a year, I dress like this. I am somebody else. And the rabbi said to him, well, I knew you had to dress differently when you're in business, but I thought the one day a year that you dress like yourself was on Yom Kippur. So that is it's a beautiful story, and it's a lesson that just tells us that we have a position, we have a public persona a lot of times that we like to keep, and these are all clothing, and we need to be very careful to, even if we wear the clothing, to know their clothing and not betray our inner self. So that's the main, of course, idea. In the story of Purim, we have the same thing. The same clothing of the high priest are the clothing or the colors and the linens and fabrics that are listed in the big party of King Ahasuerus. So we see again here a celebration of clothing, of or covering ourselves. And then King Ahasuerus asked Vashti, his wife, the queen, to come to the party, and he wanted to show her off. And some say he wanted her to be actually naked because he was already intoxicated, and he just wanted her to come and take her clothes off. And she was not willing to do that. So There's again the element of the clothing in the Megillah of Esther. At the end, when Mordecai is being rewarded, he is being dressed as the same colors and clothing as in the high not just the high priest, but as the construction of the temple. So again, we see that clothing make a big difference in the story. So people come in and out of their schemes and their real personalities and false personality and cheating and going behind the back of the king and plotting against the Jews. So and it's all about the clothing. So this is really because this is in the essence of that story. We dress up for Purim. Now, there's one more now element that ties it all together. The scroll of Esther, the book of Esther, is the only book in the Bible out of the 24 books that does not mention the name of God. And originally, the rabbis thought to not to canonize this book. Why should this book be part of the Bible if it doesn't mention the name of God? So one thing, of course, they eventually realize it's a very holy book, and will explain what is going on here. In a sense, God dresses up here too, or God is hidden in this story as well. The book of Esther, the rabbis tell us, the word comes from the Hebrew word Hester, even though it's also a name of a ancient goddess, but from the biblical perspective, it resembles the word Hester, and the word Hester literally means hidden. So something is hidden in the book of Esther that we need to reveal, that we need to go beyond the clothing, beyond what betrays our eyes, to know that there's always a story behind the story. So, how did they find out that the name of God actually appears in the book of Esther? So they tell us, the Talmud tells us that every time the book of Esther says that it says King Ahasuerus, it refers to the king, flesh and blood, to King Ahasuerus. But when it says the king, even though in the story, of course, it may seem like it's referring to King Ahasuerus, it really refers to the king in heaven, to God. So when it says the king, then that's God. But what it means is that God does not appear with his other names like Adonai, Elohim, Shaddai. There are many names that God appears in the Bible. And in this case, it just says the king. So we learn from this story probably the most important lesson of it appears in, of course, in other books like Jonah and many other books, but in the book of Esther, because God is hidden, we learn that God is there whether we see him or not, that our essence is revealed to God whether we wear clothing or not. So in a sense, in Purim, when we wear clothing, it's a very redeeming experience, because on one hand we kind of get to play with some maybe an inner desire to be somebody else, which we always have, but also to understand that this is all a show, that we really can't. In the book of Jonah, right, at the essence of the book is that we can't hide away from God. You can run, but you can't hide. So this is really the lesson. Going back to Haman and what he tried to do, he tried, because in his mind, he lives in a deceiving world, a deceiving mindset. So he thinks that everybody lives like that, and that the Jews, just like him, that we just have to pull the curtain off the Jews to see their true face, their true essence. And he's not able to do that. And even when he tries to pull the clothing off of Mordecai or the Jewish people, he gets the same thing. They're still honest people, people who are loyal, and King Ahasuerus sees, or the king sees, that Mordecai saved him a few years before. He couldn't sleep that night, and he opens the book of memory, and he sees that he never actually compensated or rewarded Mordecai for his loyalty. But what we learn is that at the essence of the Jewish people, and Mordecai is the representation or the representative of the Jewish people, even behind every clothing we wear, we have that place that we are loyal. We're loyal to God. We're loyal to ourselves, and we're loyal to our word. So this is what we need to receive back from the fall in the Garden of Eden, when the serpent said, don't trust yourself. It's not even about other people not trusting you. It's about you trust yourself. When the evil inclination of the serpent or the devil, whatever words you want to, it's the same typology of the same force. What they really want to do is not just to cause you to fall that one time. Because then if you say, I'm sorry, let me clean up and I'm getting back to my life. They don't want that. They want to create a situation that you now doubt yourself, and you start doing their job, and you just perpetuate the self-doubt. That's the worst situation to be in. Doubt is the bite of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And that bite, that is the doubt, to insert the self-doubt, that is what causes us always to wear clothing, to say that I'm not enough. I need to be somebody else. And the Amalekite that Haman was a descendant of, this is exactly what they did. And I'll read to you the passage that we read on this Shabbat. It says, Moses tells the people at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, towards the end, and he said, remember what Amalek did to you on the way when you were leaving Egypt, meaning you were just a child in many ways, right? You just came out of your mother's womb in one sense. So you don't know. And just like Eve and Adam in the Garden of Eden, they just started out, and the serpent caught them when they were not ready or not formed fully yet. And it says that he happened upon you on the way. He happened upon you on the way. He surprised you, right? It wasn't like he deceived. And then it says, and he struck those of you that were in hindmost, those who were in the back, and there were stragglers and they're weak. It says all the weaklings at your rear when you were faint and exhausted, and he did not fear God. Okay, so there's no the Amalekites have no fear of God. They think they are in charge. There's not nobody above them. There's no fear of heaven, and that is why they can do these things. It shall be that when the Lord your God gives you rest from all your enemies all around in the land that the Lord your God gives you as inheritance to possess it, you shall wipe out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. So you have to remember to forget. It's like when we say Hitler and we say Yimach Shemo, may his name be erased, but we just mentioned him, and we have to remember him. We created a Yad Vashem. We created a whole museum that is called Yad. Yad is a hand, but it's a memory. We just created a memorial for Hitler and what he did, but yet we say erased his name. But it actually, there is such a, I was able to resolve this equation in one sense, because in one sense, his name is erased, because we know that nobody's called Hitler today. Nobody in their right mind will call themselves Hitler, or those whose name was Hitler, they changed their name. So in one sense, he did. Now the Amalekite, we have to erase their name. They are hurting children, and how do we erase their name if we have to keep mentioning him and remember what Amalek did to you, and then to annihilate them? So the idea is to wipe out the force of Amalek. We don't know who's Amalek today. When people say, "Oh, Hamas in Gaza is Amalek," well, they're Amalek in the sense of the force that they used. They attacked those who were not ready for them. They came into their homes. They burnt babies. They did all these horrible things that Amalek did. Yes. So those people you can consider Amalek. You can consider their force, their desire as an Amalek desire. Doesn't mean that we wipe out their cows and their horses, but whoever is involved in this kind of act is an Amalekite in idea. So that we have to erase. And what we have to erase in this world, and it goes back from the Garden of Eden to Purim and the high priest, is that no matter what clothing we wear, we should not be deceiving ourselves and the people. We have to understand that we actually would never be anything else, no matter what clothing we wear. So the high priest may wear the high priest clothing, but Aaron inside will always be Aaron. And when he comes out of these clothing, he's Aaron. And in the Garden of Eden, when they wore the clothing, they still were Adam and Eve. And in Purim, when we dress up, we still are who we are. We may want to toy and exercise being somebody else, but the end of the day, and that is the goal, is to be naked before God. So, of course, today, for modesty and everything else, we wear clothing, but in front of God, we're always naked. We're always tocho kevaro. We always, what is inside and the outside should be the same. And that is the lesson from this Shabbat, the Parsha of Tetzaveh, the clothing of the high priest, the Parashat Zachor of what to annihilate Amalek, and Purim, the holiday that we dress up on. So Shabbat Shalom, and I hope we will learn this lesson.